Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I want to talk about the Dungeons and Dragons 5e books. Um, and actually, we're going to talk about. So when we talk about the books themselves, what we're really talking about is we're talking about the what I want to talk about primarily is the Dungeons and Dragons hardback 256 page full color books, not the box sets, not all these kind of ephemeral products, but the classic Dungeons and Dragons books. It's the same shape and size that you would have gotten in 1E, right? But I want to talk about all the 5E books. So what are we going to talk about with these books specifically today? Who should buy them? And when you should buy them, specifically the order you should buy them. And we'll talk about DMs and players, okay? So as far as when you should, so who is going to be, DM, dungeon masters and players. And then there could be a group beyond that who would buy Dungeons and Dragons books, but I'm going to leave that out of the scope of what we're talking about today. When you should buy them, I'm specifically talking the order you should buy these in, okay? So it's very simple. Whatever you see next, that's what you should buy first. And whatever you see at the very end of this video, that's what you should buy last. So when I show you the book, that's the order they should be bought in. Okay? In my opinion. All right, let's go. All right, so let's talk about the books themselves. There's 25 hardback books, 5e hardback books. 3 of them are core, 4 of them are utility, 4 of them are setting books, and 14 are adventures. That's what they are. That's the grouping. It's not how I would have grouped it, but let's get into it. All right, so let's look at the core books. Okay, so first of all, it is my opinion all DMs and players should buy the core books first, and in this order. Okay, so let's start. We'll just go through them. Okay, all right. So basically, the player's handbook. Everybody needs it. Every player needs a player's handbook, and every dungeon master, of course, needs a player's handbook. And they should buy the player's handbook first. You really got no business reading the dungeon master guide until you've read the player's handbook as a dungeon master. And also, just a quick note here: if you're a player and you don't own the player's handbook, you need to own the player's handbook. Okay, because I'm gonna tell you a secret. Okay. Your DM hates you for it. He'll never say, he or she will never say that to your face, but we need that book, and it is out of our hands a lot for that one schmuck player who hasn't bought their player's handbook. It is a huge problem, right? So, like, just get yourself a player's handbook, all right? It is a blessing to everyone at the table, and it really is basic equipment for Dungeons & Dragons life, okay? Next. Okay, so next is the Dungeon Master Guide. Now, I hear you. You're like, wait, why does a player need to buy the Dungeon Master Guide? Every player should buy the Dungeon Master Guide, okay? Dungeons & Dragons is just, it's a life element. It is a cultural catalyst. It is the first iSport. It's so many things, and this thing is so special, and it has the ability to transform your life. Get the Dungeon Master Guide so you can understand what the game is, okay? Every player should own the Dungeon Master's Guide. I know there are Dungeon Masters out there who don't want their players to buy the Dungeon Master Guide and Monster Manual. If you have a Dungeon Master like that, improve her. Improve her. Improve her. She is broken and is unwise. Every player should have the Dungeon Master Guide and should have the Monster Manual. So they're for a host of reasons. I could do a whole video on that alone, right? The Monster Manual. At minimum, okay, first of all, the idea that players would be ignorant of monsters to make the game better is just foolish. It's bad dungeon mastering, okay? Doesn't mean you need to leave that dungeon master. You need to help them get good, okay? It is ludicrous that any dungeon master would encourage their players not to have the Monster Manual at the table. Not to have all 3 books at the table. It's ludicrous. I know there's some dungeon masters out there that do this. It's bad. It is very, very, very bad. Okay? Every player should have the Monster Manual for no other purpose than the beasts. Right? Their characters know what beasts are, and they should be able to look at the beasts whenever they want. right? This is ridiculous. So the reality is every player should, every single player and of course the Dungeon Master should own the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master Guide, and the Monster Manual. Okay? All right. Let's go into the utility books. This is a really special grouping. Okay, it's one of the reasons why I'm doing this video is I want people to start referring to these books as utility books and understanding them as utility books. Utility books are really fantastic, and I love them. Okay, so let's go from here. Okay, all right. Xanathar's Guide to Everything is the best of the utility books. Now, what's a utility book? It's a book that is not a core book, not a setting book, and not an adventure. Okay, and they're called utility books by me because they're incredibly useful. They're far more useful than setting books and adventure books. Okay, now they're more useful than 5th edition setting books because Dungeons and Dragons really didn't want to create any setting books, and so they're all pretty bad. All 5th edition setting books are pretty bad, but these utility books are fantastic. I love them. Okay, so at this point, in my opinion, all players should have the Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Just a fact. Okay, Dungeon Masters have to have this thing, and the reason why is it has a list of names in the end. Right, that is useful for players and Dungeon Masters. If you're a player, you can talk about people. You can with your player character. You can say, "Oh, I remember this bartender I met XYZ, 3 years ago, and her name was Bloop." Right, and there's literally like 15 pages of names in the back of this book. Good Lord, it's worth it for that alone. But this book is fantastic. So honestly, it's the best book by far beyond the core books. It's really fantastic. I love it. Right. So what next? Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Super solid. Not far behind Xanathar's. Love this book. It's fantastic. It is every player, every Dungeon Master should own this. Okay. All right. Now, players can stop here. Okay. I'm very blessed. I can buy every single one of these books. I am specifically taking my time in buying them. I own quite a few of these. I own all the cores and I own the utilities, and I own a smattering of the rest. Right? I don't own every single book. However, I do have friends who have loaned me ones, and so I have read through all of these. Right? But I don't own them all. Right? Sometimes I'll swap books with people. And and so I'm aware of everything that's in these books, but I don't currently own them. And one of the reasons why is just I have a family and I don't want to spend all my money all at once. But I'm slowly, like, I'll ask for birthday, for Christmas, and I would encourage you to, because I know these are expensive, right? So, but at this point, I think players can stop here. Players, if you have the core books and you have Xanathar's and you have Tasha's, you're good. Okay, you got everything you need. All right. And of course, Dungeon Masters should have all of this. Okay. Well, I'll tell you where Dungeon Masters could stop. Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, very useful. This is really solid for a Dungeon Master because it's got a lot of stat blocks for, like, this is a noble, or like different types of adventures and NPCs. This is the best collection of NPCs that exist. In my opinion, this is actually very much like one of the best books that's ever created in any role-playing game. Weirdly, it's not in Dungeons & Dragons. It's the NPC Codex done in Pathfinder 1E. It's my favorite tabletop role-playing game book in the world. I'm sorry, beyond the core books. But it's fantastic. And Mordenkainen Tome of Foes is the first D&D book in 5th edition to recreate something like it. It's not as good, but it's incredibly good. And for running NPCs, you need this thing. You really got to have it. All right, so what's next? Volo's Guide to Monsters. This is actually a pretty terrible book. I don't like this book at all. It's useless at the table. It's like good reference reading for a Dungeon Master, and you should read it, but it's horrible. It's darn near useless at the table. It's a pretty bad book. Okay, so why is it this high? Right? It's still a utility book. Okay. Everything coming after these is worse than everything we've talked about. Okay. Now, at this point, let's get into the setting books. Okay. So there are 2 setting books that, and at this point, DMs should still be buying. They still need to be buying. I'll tell you the point where DMs can cut off. Okay. Setting book, the best setting book ever created for Dungeons and Dragons, 5th edition, by far, is Explorer's Guide to Wildemount. It is the most innovative, most unique, and the most historically important. Matthew Mercer's time is not done. He is the greatest. He is the greatest single person to impact 5th edition, bar none. More than Mike Mearls. Mike Mearls designed this thing, and Matthew Mercer has put booster rockets on 5th edition. And Mike Mearls' creation would be a shadow of what it is without Matthew Mercer's nitrous to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This is incredibly important book for a host of reasons. This is a collision of celebrity and authorship. This is a collision of celebrity and Dungeons & Dragons. This is a collision of celebrity and licensing. And this brings the entire Critter crew in. This is an incredibly important book. It's extremely well written. I love it. I really like it. I actually think that this should replace Forgotten Realms. It's woke. It's modern. It's good. It's amazing. You got to own this book if you're a dungeon master. Okay. All right. What's next? Eberron. Eberron is a great setting. It was a great setting from 4th edition. It was created by Kevin. I think his name was Kevin Smith. Yeah, I think so. Oh, yeah. And so, and he was brought back to do the work on it, and but there's a lot of 5th edition touches on it. But this thing is very good. Eberron has the Warforged. Eberron has the Dragon Marks. Eberron is a cool setting. It's one of the best settings in Dungeons & Dragons, and it is the second best setting book in all of 5th edition. Okay. All right. Here you go. Dungeon Masters can stop here. If you consider yourself a good Dungeon Master, you don't need to take your collection any further than this. You really don't. You don't need anything beyond this point. Okay. I don't discourage you, especially a lot of Dungeon Masters have a pretty good nut. They make some money, right? So if you got the money, buy all of them, right? But you don't need anything beyond this, and you can stop there, especially if you're resource light. I get that, right? I get it. All right, so let's talk about the rest of the setting books. There's 2 more. Oh boy, Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. And Mythic Odysseys of Theros, you could throw these in a dumpster. They're both terrible. These are the settings that no one asked for. Okay, these are Dungeons & Dragons Magic the Gathering synergy, right? Dungeons & Dragons players did not want them because they displaced better settings like Planescape, like Rokugan, like just a host. A real Forgotten Realms book. There's just a host of great Dungeons & Dragons settings that Dark Sun that these displaced, and these, they're just pure junk. You could toss them in a dumpster. I think it frustrates the living heck out of me that these displaced better books. PHB 2, DMG 2, Monster Manual 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Like all these books are sitting there. They took resources and time, and we don't have those other books because this nonsense was made. And the only people who wanted these 2 books were Suits at Hasbro. Was like, wait, we got all this art. We could just hire some schmuck writer and throw these things on the pile, right? And so that's why they exist, right? All right. Everything else we're about to talk about is worse than all the books I just talked about. These are all pre-gen adventures. Honestly, if not a single one of these had been printed, I would be happier. Okay, it is my distinct opinion that no good dungeon master should run pre-gen adventures. Right? It is okay for newbies, for new DMs. Right? That's okay. You guys can run these. Right? But the reality is, even if they hadn't been printed, there's like literally 100 amazing modules that are free, right, online. None of these need to be pre-printed. I honestly don't think. And the reality is, it's just hand-holding that is totally unnecessary, right? And the fact that we have more of these combined than we have core, utility, and setting books is just shameful. It's so bad, But let's go through them, and this is the order you should buy them in. Okay, I'm quite aware of everything that are in these books. I do own like 1 or 2 of these, I think, and I've gone through all of them. Right. All right. So okay, let's just dig in. All right. So, Waterdeep Dragon Heist. I've run this myself. As far as adventures go, it's great. Now, why did I run this? A friend requested it. Right. So I was like, okay. All right, let's do this. You know, like, so, you know, hey, sometimes we do things for friends. It was very well written, and I really liked it. It was fantastic. It was followed up with a very traditional dungeon crawl book, which is Waterdeep Dungeon of Mad Mage. Honestly, my advice is don't ever buy any adventures, right? But if you're going to go down this road, this is what you should get, okay, in this order, okay? Next is Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden. I think there's a lot of innovation here. I think this is going to spike up as history goes, you know, as the decades go along, to be one of the best adventures that existed for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Tomb of Annihilation, another thing, really unique, very unusual story here. I think Chris Perkins really did a great job on this overall. Curse of Strahd, classic. You know, Barovia is really cool. The tarot deck in here is amazing, really, really solid. Descent into Avernus. We're starting to scrape the bottom of the barrel here. You know, it has a cool cover. You know, I was not impressed with this thing. Next, oh, here we go. So we've been talking about adventures, right? All of these adventures are hardback, 256 pages. They go up and down a little on the page count. And you know, full color throughout, right? Great, which is, by the way, it's better than any previous version. Really, really solid, right? But the rest of these next two books, these are anthologies. These are tiny little adventures stitched together, pure junk, just the worst. Bad book, Tales from the Yawning Portal, skip it. Ghost of Saltmarsh, skip it. Great writers on this. I'm sorry to say this. I know Kate Welsh worked on this. It was doomed from the start. These anthologies are just terrible. It's like stitched together, like it's like a tatterdemalion adventure book. It's really bad. Both of these, and not because the people who worked on them are bad writers, but just like anthologies suck overall, in my opinion. All right, Storm King's Thunder. Now, all the books that are listed here beyond are not bad because they were terrible. They're just bad because they're old, right? One thing is that I am happy about is Dungeon. I do think the Wizards of the Coast team is getting better as they make these books, and so all this stuff is just bad because it's old and they hadn't learned a lot of lessons, right? So, Out of the Abyss, it's there. Prince of the Apocalypse, same thing. Sword Coast Adventures Guide. You're like, wait, Scott, you got that in the wrong place. Is that a setting book? This thing is such a it was made very early in 5e's, like within a year of it being published, they put this thing out. It's just a mishmash of junk. I don't think it really qualifies as a setting book. It's not a setting. It's like like you would call it a region book. What the heck is that, right? So I just lump it in with the adventures because it feels that useless to me. So that's my take. Tyranny of Dragonids. This is a collection of 2 other books, right? And again, it's just bad because it's old, right? And there's just a lot of lessons they hadn't learned. And then, oh, by the way, collectors can stop here. There's only one more book on the list, okay? But if you're a collector and you got that dough, Ray me, get them all, right? And honestly, I'm gonna tell you the truth. I'm probably gonna end up getting them all, right? Not because I want to read them or use them or you know, go over read them again, you know, or go over them again. But well, as a historical element, right? Like Dungeons and Dragons is so interesting to me. I'm interested in the bad parts of it, right? Almost like a Star Wars fan is like, oh, I love the Star Wars Christmas special, you know, that kind of thing, right? So there's only one book that I would, even collectors, don't get this thing. Acquisitions Incorporated. This book, why does it even exist? I'll tell you why. Here's why I dislike this. This is the worst book they ever printed for 5e, in my opinion. Here's why. This book isn't for DMs and it's not for players. This is for Jerry and Mike, the 2 guys in Penny Arcade. I think this book was literally published to make them happy because Dungeons & Dragons wanted to keep Penny Arcade playing their game publicly and talking about it all the time. This was a gift to 2 people, and that's all it's useful to. This, again, just a mishmash of absolute junk. Just you look at it and you're like, why was this even printed, right? It's really bad, right? Now, with all that said, I spoke some harsh words on some of these books. I love this collection of books, and overall, I think that 5th edition is the best version of the game ever. I think it honors Gary Gygax more than any other edition. I love that these books are hardback. I love that they're the same size as the 1E books. I love that they're full color, and I love that there are 256 and that they have that 256 the 6 pages, the hardback part, the full color part. These are gorgeous, beautiful books. I'm super happy with them all. All that's my opinion. I'd love to hear what you think. What do you think the order is? What do you think is useless here? What do you think is the most useful? Who do you think should buy these, and when should they buy them? Love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.